Sophie was an ordinary teenager with an affinity for quiet moments and books. The day started normally as she sat at her desk, pencil in hand, solving math problems. The morning light cast her shadow on the wall, but she hardly noticed it waving minutely out of sync. In the park, the sun high above, she strolled peacefully, but each step she took was mirrored a fraction of a second too late by the shadow trailing behind. At home, she curled up on the couch with a book, but the shadow seemed to lean in slightly toward her, as if reading over her shoulder. These discrepancies were subtle, almost dismissible, until dusk settled. The golden light of day faded into eerie twilight, and the shadow's movements grew bolder. Sophie stood by the kitchen sink washing dishes when she first truly saw it, a thick, tendril-like extension sprouting from her shadow's feet. It slithered along the wall, and she dropped a plate with a startled gasp. Her parents called out, but she couldn't find the words to explain. Night fell, and Sophie sat rigid on her bed, watching her shadow slide along the walls and floors, twisting into grotesque forms with hooked claws and glowing eyes. The power flickered, casting her room into near darkness, save for the haunting illumination from her phone's display. Panic surged through her as the shadow blocked her escape routes. Anticipating every frantic move she made, it loomed larger, a sinister predator. Rushing down the hall, she saw the shadow detach, yet still tethered to her by an otherworldly thread. It defied physics, crawling along the ceiling, dropping behind furniture, advancing with relentless, malevolent precision. Her heart pounded, her breath shallow. She stumbled into the bathroom, locking the door, only to find the shadow waiting in the mirror, half of her own reflection consumed by dark tendrils and a monstrous visage. Staring back with glowing eyes of pure hatred, desperation washed over her as the shadow began to envelop her. Tendrils of darkness wrapped around her body, cold and unyielding. She tried to resist, but the shadow's pull was inescapable. She fell to the floor, writhing in terror as her identity frayed. Her limbs transformed, became twisted and monstrous, and her eyes glowed with the same sinister light as the shadow's. In the final throes of her struggle, Sophie found herself walking down the stairs towards the basement, drawn inexplicably to its darkness. The transformation was complete. She was no longer Sophie, but a vessel for the dark entity, her humanity all but erased. She stood at the edge of an alley, a grotesque figure half consumed by living shadow, staring out into the abyss with empty eyes. The monster within her now in full control, her final look an eerie blend of fear, anguish, and the void left by her lost soul. As Sophie stood at the edge of the alley, her mind a fractured battleground of fleeting memories and overwhelming darkness, a flicker of resistance sparked deep within her. It was faint, barely noticeable beneath the weight of the shadow's control, but it was there, a final ember of her true self. Suddenly, a distant voice pierced through the fog of her mind. It was her mother's voice, calling her name from somewhere far away, echoing with love and concern. The sound stirred something within Sophie, a desperate longing to break free. The shadow hesitated, its glowing eyes flickering as if caught off guard by this sudden surge of emotion. For a moment, Sophie's true form flickered back into existence, her eyes wide with fear and hope. She grasped at this brief chance, focusing on every memory that defined her, the warmth of her mother's hug, the joy of laughter with friends, and the comfort of her favorite books. She fought against the tendrils of darkness with all her remaining strength, clawing her way back to the surface of her own mind. The shadow howled, its grip loosening as Sophie's willpower intensified. It twisted and writhed, trying to reassert control, but Sophie pushed back harder, fueled by the need to reclaim her humanity. The alleyway seemed to shake with their internal struggle, the darkness ebbing and flowing like a stormy sea. With a final, anguished scream, Sophie forced the shadow to release her, ripping herself free from its grasp. The creature recoiled, retreating back into the depths of her shadow where it belonged, now weak and defeated. Sophie collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath, her heart pounding as the familiar warmth of her own spirit slowly returned. She looked down at her hands, normal, human, and unmarked by the shadow's touch. Sophie knew the darkness was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but it no longer had control. She had faced it and won, reclaiming her mind and body from the abyss. As the first light of dawn broke the horizon, Sophie stood up, trembling but triumphant. She turned her back on the alley, walking away from the darkness and back towards the life she almost lost. In her pocket, she felt the comforting weight of her phone, a reminder of the real world that awaited her, a world filled with light, hope, and second chances.